In 2008, Gina Carano was the most famous female mixed martial arts fighter in the world. Dana White personally tried to sign her to the UFC. She said no. She kept saying no for 17 years, through multiple offers, through multiple reported contracts that she walked away from. She built a Hollywood career. She did everything except sign with the UFC. In 2026, when she finally returned to MMA for a single fight against Ronda Rousey, she didn't sign with the UFC then either. She signed with a different promotion. Why? The simplest answer is the right one. The UFC's women's division was built on a business model that the smartest female fighters saw through, in some cases before they ever signed. In this video, I'm going to show you the math behind that business model, the 4 women who refused it, and the cost paid by every woman who didn't. Subscribe, because Field Queens covers the stories that the promotion's own publicity machine cannot. Stay until the end. The numbers do not get less brutal. Let's start with the money. Dana White's net worth, as reported by Forbes in 2025, is approximately $600 million. He earns roughly $20 million per year as the CEO of TKO Group Holdings, the publicly traded entity that owns both the UFC and the WWE. TKO is valued at approximately $21 billion. White personally collected around $360 million when WME-IMG bought the UFC for $4 billion in 2016. That's a personal payday from a single transaction. Not a salary, not endorsements, a single transaction. Now let's look at the other end of the ledger. Most UFC fighter pay is not publicly disclosed. In 2020, the Nevada Athletic Commission, the largest regulator of fights in North America, stopped publishing fighter purses. The UFC requested it. The commission complied. California remains the only major commission that still discloses. The numbers that are public are bad. According to multiple investigations cited by Bloody Elbow, Sports Illustrated, and the UFC Fighters Association, the median UFC fighter purse in the late 2010s was approximately $15,000 per fight. The average UFC fighter fights 2 to 3 times per year. The average UFC fighter's annual gross is therefore somewhere between $30,000 and $45,000. Female fighters disclosed average slightly higher in some years, around $50,000, but that is gross, before taxes, before training camp costs, before manager percentages. Federal taxes alone take 33%. Training camp costs, coaches, sparring partners, nutritionists, gym fees run between $20,000 and $40,000 per camp. 2 camps a year, that's $40,000 to $80,000 in camp costs. Manager percentage, 15% to 20% off the top. The math on the average female UFC fighter, net of expenses, approximately $54,000 per year. A retail manager at a Las Vegas department store makes more. Now compare that to what the alternative paid. In January 2020, Cris Cyborg headlined Bellator 238. Her disclosed purse for that fight, $250,000. That number was reported as half of what she had earned for her last UFC fight against Amanda Nunes, meaning her last UFC fight earned approximately $500,000. But here is the key detail. The Bellator contract she signed in 2019 after leaving the UFC was described publicly by Bellator boss Scott Coker as incentivized. Coker stated on the record that the total compensation in the deal could make it one of the biggest deals in the history of mixed martial arts. That phrase, biggest deals in the history of mixed martial arts, was said about a female fighter who had just left the UFC. In October 2023 at Bellator 300, Cyborg earned a disclosed $300,000 payday, plus undisclosed bonuses, plus pay-per-view shares that the UFC contract she had left did not offer her. Why did Cyborg leave? She has answered that question in multiple interviews. The UFC didn't pay her what she was worth. The UFC told her she would never headline a major card. The UFC built her up as Ronda Rousey's eventual opponent, and then, when Rousey lost, the UFC stopped promoting Cyborg. She didn't quit fighting. She quit fighting for them. The Bellator move is worth pausing on, because it is rarely framed correctly. When Cyborg left the UFC in 2019, the conventional sports media coverage treated it as a controversy, as if she had abandoned the premier promotion, as if she should be grateful for what she had. But look at what actually happened. She left the dominant promotion in her sport at the peak of her career. She moved to a smaller, less prestigious promotion, and she earned more money. That sequence is not how labor markets are supposed to work. If the UFC were paying market rate, no fighter should be able to leave it for a smaller promotion and earn more. That is the definition of below-market compensation. The fact that Cyborg's move was financially advantageous is, by itself, proof that the UFC was underpaying her. It is the cleanest evidence of below-market pay that exists in modern combat sports, and the sports press treated it like she was the one making a mistake. She wasn't. She was the smartest person in the room. Now let me show you the other three. Gina Carano was offered UFC contracts as early as 2008. Dana White personally tried to recruit her. She did not sign. Carano has stated in multiple interviews that the UFC could never come back for the money or for the attention. She built a career outside the promotion built around her absence. In 2026, when she finally returned to MMA for the Rousey rematch, she signed not with the UFC, but with Most Valuable Promotions, a startup promotion that paid her enough to come out of a 17-year retirement. The UFC could not. Holm beat Ronda Rousey on November 14, 2015. The fight is in the all-time top 3 biggest pay-per-view events in UFC history. Holm earned a purse reported around $500,000 for that fight. Rousey, who lost, reportedly earned $3 million. For the same fight, the winner earned 1/6 of the loser. 4 months later, Holm lost the title to Miesha Tate. The UFC marketing machine that had built her up for one specific narrative arc moved on. Holm has fought consistently since. Her name does not appear on UFC promotional graphics with the frequency of fighters who have accomplished significantly less. Amanda Nunes retired in 2023. At the time of her retirement, she was the only fighter, male or female, to hold UFC championship titles in 2 separate divisions simultaneously and defend both. She was, by every measurable standard, the most dominant female mixed martial artist in the history of the sport. She retired at 35, at her peak. The UFC did not stop her. The UFC did not offer the contract to keep her. The UFC let her walk. She has stated in retirement interviews that she felt she had nothing left to prove. The promotion did not disagree. Compare that to how the UFC handles a dominant male champion. When Jon Jones, the men's heavyweight champion, hinted at retirement in 2024, the UFC structured a record-breaking pay-per-view to keep him. When Conor McGregor stopped fighting consistently, the UFC kept his contract active and continued to feature him in marketing for years. When Khabib Nurmagomedov retired, the UFC publicly courted him back for a single more fight at a price they would not have paid a female champion. When Amanda Nunes retired, the UFC announced new fights for other people on the same card she was supposed to headline. The asymmetry is not subtle. The promotion treats male and female champions as different categories of asset. The compensation reflects that. The retention strategy reflects that. The public marketing reflects that. 3 of the 4 most dominant women in the history of the UFC's women's division are no longer fighting in the UFC. The 4th, Holm, is rarely promoted on national broadcasts. That is the operating environment. Those are the facts. So what is the pattern? The UFC has been a billion-dollar promotion since 2016. It is now part of a $21 billion entity. The promotion's CEO has personally made hundreds of millions of dollars. The women who built that promotion's female division, Ronda Rousey, Holm, Cris Cyborg, Amanda Nunes, collectively were paid a fraction of what the men who built the male division earned. And of those 4, 3 are no longer fighting under the UFC banner. 2 left for better contracts. 1 retired without a counteroffer. The 4th, Holm, is still under contract. She is also rarely promoted. The fighters who saw this coming did not sign in the first place. Carano refused. Other elite-level fighters chose Bellator, One Championship, Professional Fighters League. Some chose retirement over the UFC pay structure. The promotion built its women's division on the labor of fighters who were paid below the going rate of comparable men's divisions. The fighters who could leave, left. The fighters who couldn't, stayed and absorbed the difference. This is not a controversy. This is the operating model. There is one more piece to this story. In 2024, multiple sports medicine studies, including data referenced by Cleveland Clinic Research, indicated that female fighters report concussion symptoms at significantly elevated rates compared to male fighters in equivalent training and competition workloads. The reasons are complex: neck musculature, brain anatomy, hormonal factors during recovery. Female fighters under standard UFC contracts also generally sign non-disparagement clauses. These clauses limit what a current fighter can say publicly about pay structures, medical treatment, or contract terms without facing financial penalty. In other words, the women still in the UFC cannot publicly criticize the system that pays them. The ones who left, Cyborg, retired Rousey, Carano, Nunes, can and do. Watch what they have said about pay, about fight frequency, about post-career medical support. Then watch what active female UFC fighters say. The silence is structural, and it works. There is no major active female UFC fighter in 2026 who has publicly criticized the UFC's compensation structure. There are dozens of former fighters who have. There are competitors at other promotions who have. There are fighters under amateur contracts in regional shows who have. But the active UFC roster, silent. That silence is not a coincidence. It is the explicit product of a contract structure that punishes athletes for speaking publicly about their pay. The structure has been in place since at least 2011 and has been enforced through arbitration, withheld bonuses, and removal from main card slots. The UFC does not need to win these disputes in court. The UFC needs the fighters to know they will lose if they try. Most fighters, looking at the cost-benefit of speaking publicly, choose the rational option. They stay silent. They take the next fight. They hope the next contract has slightly better terms. The structure is designed to produce that choice. It does. The UFC women's division is one of the most lucrative business properties in modern combat sports. Ronda Rousey built it, Holm legitimized it, Cris Cyborg gave it credibility outside of Rousey's shadow. Amanda Nunes raised its competitive ceiling to a place it has not returned to since. All 4 of those women are no longer fighting for the UFC, or fighting at all, despite being some of the most marketable athletes in the history of women's combat sports. Gina Carano never fought for them. The promotion that owns the franchise made $600 million for its CEO and $21 billion for its parent company. The 4 women who made that valuation possible are doing other things. That is the operating model. That is the math. And the women who looked at the math early and refused to sign, Gina Carano, the fighters who chose Bellator, the ones who retired before they could be discarded, were not wrong. They were ahead. Subscribe to Field Queens. The promotion's marketing department isn't going to tell you any of this.